Okay, let's see. I think it just takes a moment, and here we go. So, welcome to the Self Connection Podcast. I'm here with Sharon, and we're going to start off with a meditation. Today's topic is going to be integration. So, I'd like you to just take a moment to close your eyes and to feel your feet on the ground, letting your body relax, and taking one nice deep nourishing breath and letting it come out slowly, and just letting yourself feel what that breath is doing inside. And you might take another breath in, holding it for a beat and slowly letting it go. And just paying attention to whatever's bubbling up inside and noticing there may be thoughts, there may be feelings, there may be a story of a variety of things happening. Just watching that activity from the perspective of a bird flying high in the sky and just flowing by all that is around it, the clouds, the landscape, and trying not to be attached to any particular thought or feeling or sensation, but just noticing it, noticing these as sensations. Coming back to your breath as an anchor. Whenever you feel like you're getting pulled, and what you're trying to do is to observe your experience, and then when the experience becomes too chaotic or you find yourself in the hamster wheel of thought and feeling, coming back to your breath as a home base, as a secure place to land. Just allowing yourself to look freely, to feel freely. And you can allow this practice to continue as long as you'd like, for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Or you can pause here as we make a transition towards ending the meditation. But before we do that, I'd like you to appreciate the practice of switching between anchoring in breath and observing your experience, and the way that you are using your consciousness to process and to move through your experience. And now, feeling perhaps your hands on the furniture you're sitting on, feeling your lap, slowly opening your eyes and looking around the room. I'm going to reconnect with Sharon. Sharon, how are you doing right now? How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm very grateful. It felt wonderful. Yes.
Good,
Uh,
good.
Something really struck me when you said going back to the breath, to your home, landing in your home.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful metaphor for the place inside the energy space of the self, the spirit. It is your home.
Mm-hmm.
So that I like that very much.
Well, I got that from you, and you got that from Laura Dotson. Do you
Hello.
remember the story you
Yes.
told me?
Yes. Uh huh.
Yeah, that there
Yeah.
was this
Okay.
really precarious situation that was happening, and you saw
Mm,
her really grounded, and you asked her what she did, and she
yeah.
said, "I went home," and she went to herself.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think developmentally that's a process for everyone. Initially, as a child, your home base is your parents, and then you have experiences that expand you and put you into all kinds of unknown and chaos, and eventually the home base becomes internalized, and
Mm,
and you find your home within yourself, and um, the natural difficulties and traumas of life, you know, I think pull us away from home, but
mm-hmm,
then also strengthen our connection to home
mm-hmm,
potentially if we are open
mm-hmm.
to doing that inner work. So
I
um,
love that the way you put that into the continuum of life from a child, your parents, or your home, or your caretakers coming up, and it was just amazing to me as you said that. I just had flash moments all through, like college and graduate school, where it was very scary and unknown, and I had to come home to myself
yeah,
and
yeah.
learning how to do that separate from your original home. That's
hmm
beautiful, Tim.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I made my first attempt at first year university, and it did not go well. I did not have the discipline. I didn't know what I was getting myself into because high school was very easy for me. Not very easy. I still worked hard, but and then when I went to university, I was like, I thought I was working hard already. I had to be even more organized. So I failed first year university. Was working just an odd job, and I thought, okay. And I remember sitting alone in this um, in this park and around trees and just having a moment with nature, and then having the resolve of like, what do like my
Mm-hmm.
capital I am
Mm-hmm.
myself. What do I want to do? And I knew I wanted to work with people, and I knew that I wanted to be of service in some way, and
Mm.
counseling was an idea. So I I found the resolve by having some time to myself
Wow.
to gather that strength and that energy to say, well, this is what I'm going to do, and so I think and I've gone through that cycle many many times. It's like you find yourself, you lose yourself,
Mm-hmm.
the pain of losing yourself becomes like the slingshot that snaps you back into place,
Mm-hmm.
or potentially the things that distract us can keep us into some unhealthy, toxic status quo.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's the opportunity of expanding awareness, and so the practice of what we did is just realizing that power of paying attention, of listening to your experience, and transformational work is another, obviously other things and other processes, but that's the first step, is just to notice that your creative consciousness is at work all the time, and there's certain patterns at work that help you, and then there are things underground that are scripts, that are patterns that keep us stuck. So last time we talked about choice,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how important choice is as a resource, and I I was hoping that we could speak more about choice today and maybe make it more concrete. And then you introduced the topic of integration. So I think in order to make a choice, you have to be integrated. You have to have done the work to have something to integrate. But how are you thinking about the words integration and choice and the relationship between them? So,
I
um,
hadn't. I hadn't. I thought you were asking me if we wanted to go to a different subject. So let's go back and talk about. You said you wanted to be more concrete about choice, so we can
uh-huh.
choose to do that. Let's do that. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so yeah, I think with choice, I'm wondering what, we talked a little bit about some of the what are the ingredients to becoming a choice maker. And I think that um, certainly part of that is awareness, being
Mm-hmm.
able to do the work of
Huge
awareness.
piece. Yes.
Because if I'm not aware of the dynamics of
Right.
what I'm doing in relationship,
Yes.
and everything's happening automatically because
Yes.
my response, my behavior is automatic from a reactive place. Like
Yes.
I'm angry, and when I'm angry, I go into blaming,
Yes.
and I say it's all your fault. You know, how could you do
Yes.
this to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I could be justify that intellectually because there's an
Mm-hmm.
expectation of what you should have done and you didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But being in that survival energy, which emphasizes the other person and not
Mm-hmm.
as much awareness around the self
Yes.
of what's going on in me, it's disempowering, and
Mm-hmm.
often Virginia Satir, she would use a sculpt of a person pointing a finger, hand on the hip, and pointing at the other person. And the initial experience of that is power, but it's disempowering because of the lack of self-reflection and ownership of one's own behavior, feelings, and perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what do you think in terms of what are some concrete advice or practices that people can do so they can enhance their own ability to be connected to the resource of choice?
Mm-hmm. Well, the primal instincts are fight, flight, or freeze for all of us. The reptilian brain. And then if we are going to be able to make choices other than go into those primal protective reactive places, we need to have, as you said, an awareness. And one of the things that I have found helpful to people is to expand on Virginia's concept of the pointed finger as you should be doing something other than you are. It's all your fault. So I say, okay, the forms of fight that I see most frequently, not the blaming toward others, but also self blaming. And that people who have been traumatized, really, really traumatized as children, abused, beaten, sexually abused, almost always turn every situation into somehow it's their fault. It's all
Mm,
my fault, which
right,
is understandable because when you're little, you're constantly trying to keep the parental figures okay, so you take
right,
all the blame.
right.
So, bringing people to a place of understanding whether it's blaming on the inside and where that came from, so they could choose to begin to modify that and practice not going toward always seeing
Mm,
everything as their fault, or if their instinct is their habit is the opposite, which is to always point the finger to protect their ego and say it's somebody else's fault, beginning to help them understand where that's coming from, that it's a protection, and then what are the consequences. If
mm,
they if they begin to see that the consequences are, we usually get somebody else who's going to blame you back. It's going to escalate, or they're going to withdraw some way, and they can begin to say, okay, this is not benefiting me or the relationship. How can I choose to begin to stop myself from
right.
going to that place? And what we know is that when we go to those places, it's all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime that you hear yourself saying, it's all your fault or it's all my fault, we know that the person is not in their self. That's a part, and those are child parts, the think and all or nothing,
Mm,
black and white. So, first choice is about blaming, but also the form of fighting, it can be generalizing. Like, you, again, this is childlike language. I'm in pain. You, expect my husband home at 6 o'clock so we can go to something, and he shows up at 6:30, and I attack him and say, "You are always late." Okay, what I'm immediately doing is trying to say I'm in pain, but I put it into pointing figures in a generalizing way. And the odds are one of two things. Again, he's going to fight back with
mm,
blah, 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 or he's going to withdraw and flee. so that the pattern will continue. So when you can bring people to an awareness of, whoops, I'm just about to say you never or you always toward someone else or toward themselves, bring that up into a consciousness that I can choose to treat them differently and stay out of defensiveness, and I can choose to
Mm.
treat myself differently.
So like, if we can stay with that
Uh
example,
huh.
you are always late.
Mm-hmm.
What is the message that you are actually sending with those words? And that, like, let's say that tone is, you are always late, like very frustrated, very
Mm-hmm.
harsh,
Mm-hmm.
very blaming,
Mm-hmm.
shaming, even
Yes.
y- absolute. You're always
Mm-hmm.
late.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you think the message that's penetrating through is that's unhealthy? Um,
That's penetrating through in terms of
yeah, so like
you're
I'll just say
bad. You're bad.
yes, exactly. That's one thing. Like some kind of like it's like some kind of um, conclusion about the self,
Mm-hmm.
about his self, or
Yes.
capital S self, and I think that that does express I'm so disappointed and I'm so hurt that I'm perceiving you with devil horns, that you're bad, that you're
Yeah.
the devil,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And certainly in an intimate relationship like a marriage, couples do get to those places.
Oh
It's
yes.
inevitable, I think. And this idea that you're bad or you're evil. I mean, I think that's the source of a lot of destructiveness in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yes.
perception and that expression and that rigid stance of blame
Mm-hmm.
expresses like I wonder what it'd be like to just go there initially instead of just saying because you are always late. Emotionally, what the person receives is you think of me as no good,
Mm-hmm.
right? And children certainly pick that up too. It's like you always make a mess, or you always
Mm-hmm.
forget your homework, or you
Right.
always
Yeah. You're
forget.
never ready on time.
You're never ready on, yes. Okay. So then the kids internalizing, I'm no good. I am no good. And um, I guess coming back to choice, there's several choices. The choice is how, as the deliverer of the message, what
Mm-hmm.
are some choices I have around how to communicate it? And the second part, which I think we should do both, the second part is as the receiver of that message, how can I receive it in a way that is best and healthy for me?
Mm-hmm.
So as the giver of the message, certainly part of what you were already hinting at is what I'm feeling is pain,
I
right? The
was going to
emotion
say
is
it's
pain.
pain on both sides. Pain. Yeah.
Pain on both sides. But speaking from the person that's delivering the message,
Yeah.
if I'm in pain and coming back to Virginia Satir's language of what we're aiming at is to get out of survival communication,
Mm-hmm.
which is blaming, placating,
Mm-hmm.
irrelevance, and super reasonable. And I'll explain each of those four just so for maybe people
Mm-hmm.
that aren't aware of what those mean. Blame is essentially the kind of stance or the kind of pattern where everything is always someone else's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually having to do with some very clear sense of justice and a clear sense of expectation of something that did not go right. Placating is where I take the blame on and I am constantly feeling guilty and ashamed and that I have to help and that if I don't do it then no one else will and just taking on the load of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People that have taken on the role of a parentified child are often placators because they're taking on I should help, I should take on more in my family, or I
Mm-hmm.
should and they take on roles that are inappropriate for them.
Mm-hmm.
Irrelevance is the stance where there's not much of an attachment to emotion or the subjectivity within myself or others, and and also disconnection from the realities of the context. So I show up late, and I was like, oh yeah, and then I start talking about the squirrel that I saw along the way, or
Mm-hmm.
I make jokes and things like that to distract from
Right.
the situation. It's
Right.
very hard to, if I'm in a relevant sense, it's hard to pin down what I really think and mean
Yep.
because I'm constantly throwing up distractors.
Yep.
Also, the use and overuse and abuse of substances would fall within this coping stance
Mm-hmm.
because it's a disconnection from self and other. Um, And the last one is super reasonable, which is the stance of focusing on facts and the context, but a disconnection from inner subjectivity. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm in super reasonable stance, and I know this one well, this is one of my, when I'm in survival mode, I'll go to super reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
is I won't talk about how I'm feeling, and I won't comment or really be able to take in when you tell me how you're feeling. I'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about research, I'll talk about books I've read, I'll talk about facts, and be very
Mm-hmm.
dry. Um,
Right.
so when we're in when we're in either of those four survival stances, um, the the transformation happens in being able to take my communication, to be aware of what I'm really feeling and needing and yearning for, and to transform that into some kind of behavior that I think accounts for myself, the other, and the context. And that's what Virginia Satir would call congruent communication.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is that process? Can you describe in terms of how you walk people through that? And for the general audience listening to this, what are some things that they can do to slow themselves down and to get into a choice making, um, that territory?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say what I practice for myself
Yeah,
because I think that's the most important, is trying to live this
yeah, absolutely.
is what, let's use that example. My husband doesn't show up till 6:30 and we're supposed to be somewhere and I am agitated, annoyed. Uh, by the way, this is not his character.
You're not you're not
No,
calling it
no.
your
But
husband right
so
now?
I'm
No.
making this. No,
Yeah.
I'm making this up. So I get agitated, annoyed, and my first instinct is to like, where have you been? What we were supposed to be there at such and such a time. Why are you late? And all that, attacking kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and if I can bring that into my awareness and go, okay, that's the agitation and anger. What's underneath that? Because there's always something underneath that. And to know that clearly, what is it? Well, I'm upset because I wanted to be at this other event. And I'm going to be embarrassed if we have to walk in late. I've also was kind of worried, really, that he'd gotten hurt on the freeway somewhere. Okay, so what are you really feeling? Well, first of all, I'm grateful he's home and he's safe. And then from a centered place to say, I was concerned about you, what happened, and I'm feeling pressure. We need to get going now.
Right.
And I think so much of it is in the voice tone, whether
Hmm.
I'm now blaming or not. Okay.
Hmm.
And the closer you are in a relationship, the more subtle that is. But the other person picks up the energy one way or the other. So if I'm not in a blaming place and I'm in a caring place, at the same time caring about my desire to do this other thing, then the odds are that's going to pull to a centered energy in him, a non-defensive place. And then
Hmm.
we're going to be fine with each other. Okay. So it's a
So
choice about goodwill at some level.
yeah, and I think goodwill is is obviously you need that energy so that people can grow because but in that example, if you're saying you're always late, it's not that maybe it's unreal, it's not reality that he's always late. Let's say he's late often,
Mm-hmm.
right? So regardless of the context of where where you want to go, what you had planned, or you're worried about his safety, like I think that what you're describing is often the pathway towards a resolution that we as therapists go with people, which is um, towards myself, what I really want. But I think there's something in that I think is also an important choice point is we need ways of criticizing each other too, and
Mm-hmm.
saying, you know what, in our relationship, especially between two adults,
Mm-hmm.
at work or in a relationship, we're in roles too. and we have
Yes.
responsibilities to meet.
Yeah.
And I think if we're too loose and too airy-fairy with, like, if punctuality is important to me, and I marry someone who doesn't care about punctuality,
Uh-huh.
that's going to be a problem. And either I need to accept the relaxed attitude towards time,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to work on that. We're going to work on that together till we get
Mm-hmm.
to some middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
In life and in reality, that resolution, I think it has to happen because you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have that fight 10,000 times.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I guess to what I'm talking about is not just that specific situation, but I think also in the communication of um, the pattern of what's happening and
Mm-hmm.
the ability to give that criticism at the level of role
Mm-hmm.
and not hurting the person at the level of their self, their essence, their
Yes.
core.
Yes.
And I think that this is like having that as a choice point is the expansion, and your what you're expressing is that deep
Mm-hmm.
compassion for self and that deep compassion for other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to be balanced, and it can be balanced when we differentiate between the role, husband and wife, and the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like Sharon, as my
Mm-hmm.
co-host, as my
Mm-hmm.
friend,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've been starting late, and
Mm-hmm.
we haven't, but I'm just making
Mm-hmm.
this up. Saying we've been starting late, and what that means for me is then I'm late for my next appointment, and this has been really frustrating for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really need us to work out a way, and I need to be able to trust you with how we're using time together as
Mm-hmm.
as our resource,
Mm-hmm.
and so and to be able to talk then about all my feelings, to say all my
Yes.
perceptions,
Yes.
to lay it out all on the table, and behind all that is I love you,
Mm-hmm.
and we're in this together, and I see you at your whole self,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not managing time well, right? So we got to talk about that together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that way, it does two things. We're able to talk at whatever the specific criticism needs to be, but then you also feel held in the space together.
Yes. Yes. I'm reminded of Thomas Gordon, who wrote Parent Effectiveness Training. I
Hmm.
don't know if we've talked about this before, the win-win approach, but
No.
it's been extremely helpful to me in my life, which is, he says, okay, when there's a situation where there's a difference, of behavior or desires, asking, what do you need? And what do you need? And then how can we each get our needs met at the least cost to each other?
Mm.
Okay. And that is so powerful. Um, to, uh, what do I need? I need for you to call me and let me know that you're going to be late. Or I need for us to work out something where you understand
Mm.
that, this is the time that we need to leave. What do you
Yeah.
need? Well,
Yeah.
I need flexibility because I never know what the traffic's going to be like on the freeway.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can
Yeah.
we work with that?
Yeah.
It's
No, I
just
love that.
amazing.
Yeah, because I think then coming back to that word integration, because I
Mm-hmm.
love that word. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to throw it in there. There is
Okay.
an integration now of, the difference between self and role. Okay, so we're wearing the hat husband and wife. Let's say that you and I are doing
Mm-hmm.
that, husband and wife. We also have our self. When we dig down by asking that question, what do you need, Sharon? What do you need, Tim? We're getting to the yearnings. And the yearnings live within the self. And
Yes.
when we tap into that, then we can create that which we need, right? And we're
Exactly.
not stuck on the you're never late. Because if we're stuck on the rule, there's a rigidity around that. Then we're not dealing with the complexity of the situation, which
Right.
is traffic, which is weather, which is
Mm-hmm.
other people, which is my growing up, and then an infinite number of factors. It's just I've
Mm-hmm.
now labeled you an inconsiderate late person.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever we get into the labeling of one another, we finish the conversation. We
Yes.
can't have a dialogue.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And one
um,
more thing I'd like to say about that win-win approach is that when you
mhm.
come to that place of how can we each get our needs met at the least cost to each other, you're pulling back into the self and out of the all or nothing defensive parts.
Mm, mhm.
It's a process that really helps you pull back into yourself and that higher wisdom and broader openness.
Yeah, I love that question too, because it's like with the least cost to us, like there's going to be a cost.
Yep.
The presumption of that is,
Yeah.
I will have to make an effort, you will have to make an
Yep.
effort to make it work.
Yep.
And what is that cost going to be? If I can acknowledge that and accept that there's going to be a cost, then I have a choice to make. Okay,
Exactly.
like, I don't know my schedule at the end of the day. Sometimes there's last minute meetings that come.
Yep.
Can I accept that? If I hear that from the other person of what their context is like, then I have a choice to make of whether I'm going to accept that as a reality.
Yes.
So
Yes.
good. All right.
Good.
How are you feeling about our
I'm
our
excited.
conversation today?
We
Yeah.
didn't. Well, it's always like we never know where we're going, but we
Oh, that's the
enjoy it
best.
immensely.
Yeah. Me too. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we were able to throw integration into that,
Yes.
and I hope that we can expand on that. I just felt that there was more to say about choice.
Yeah.
So
Thank you
before
for
we,
asking about that. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, Sharon.
All
So
right.
let's say bye to everybody,
Bye.
and please join us next time. And
Okay.
you just stick around for a second. I
Yes.
just want to
Yes.
say